Welcome once again to Tom's Atypical Tales of Terror and other stuff. I hope the first little treat teased and titillated you. A few things before we begin. Rating, reviewing, and liking, as appropriate on the platform you listen on, is very important to grow the podcast. The more positive ratings, reviews, and likes, the higher the pod will be in lists and on pages, and the more likely to be spotlighted, meaning more listeners. Another thing that would help greatly is joining us on Patreon, link in the show notes. There you will find various perks at a range of prices that I hope will suit everyone. And please follow or subscribe to ensure you always know when the next episode comes out. On another note, I want to direct you to a great news source for board games, movies, video games, and collectibles, Spida Games, at spidagames.com. That's SPIEDA games.com. Link in the show notes. Full disclosure, I am also an employee of Spida, but I don't make anything extra for referring you, and in fact I am making nothing at all right now because we just opened. There is a grand opening sale ongoing, and while the inventory is low, we are adding more every week, so keep checking. And if you don't see something you want, feel free to reach out via the customer service links and ask. We will be happy to order it for you or may already have it in stock but not uploaded. Also, Spida Games is LGBTQIA friendly, with related programs planned for the future, as well as being gay-owned, so help support a small business that supports marginalized folks. And if you came here from the link on Spida, welcome! Thanks for checking out the store and then coming on over here. Now, a quick recap of what this show is all about for new and returning viewers. On this show, I want to tell original horror stories, but I also want to provide a place to talk about the struggles of living and being creative while dealing with ADHD and autism. In other words, having an atypical brain. Each episode will have a small segment on that up front, but the story will always be the main part. Alrighty, with that stuff out of the way, let's get to it. For today's segment on being atypical, I just want to talk a bit about myself, what makes me atypical, and what that means. Autism is a complex disorder of the brain that affects the way a person interacts with and experiences the world. It affects social skills, learning, and speech in various ways. It makes it so that a person sees the world differently than neurotypical people, those who some call normal. As for myself, how does this manifest? I sometimes miss little things that are obvious to other people, like a look or inflection or tone. For instance, in an online chat with acquaintances from a group, somebody started a conversation with a question about Lord of the Rings, asking lightheartedly, what if Henry Ford had gotten the One Ring and mass-produced it? Others made responses in an unserious vein, but I came in as a superfan with explanations from lore as to why it wouldn't work. Then a little later, somebody else asked if any rings could be used for good. I launched into a deep explanation from the lore as to how that could and did happen. At that point, someone else said to me that they already knew the lore but were just joking around, and the asker also responded to say the same, that he already knew. As I told them, when I saw the question, I answered it literally and seriously. This is because it didn't occur to me that they were interested in just having fun. I answered the literal question without thinking about the specific nuances of the conversation and what would be appropriate. I thought, well, of course they can be used for good. Here's how, and explained. Being a part of a group conversation, it's hard to keep up with the nuances, and I also tend to get left behind because I'm not comfortable just breaking in. So by the time a pause comes up, anything I want to say usually isn't appropriate any longer. I will also sometimes think something is funny or okay to say only for it to not go over well, or to seem like it didn't fit well with what everyone else was saying, because I misread the tone of the conversation. It's easy for me to not realize what the appropriate social interaction type is for a given activity or setting. For instance, years ago I went to a bar trivia night with my now wife and another couple, my wife's friend and her husband. I was competitive and immediately answered all the questions if I knew them. I was focused on winning or doing well. I didn't realize that they wanted chances to answer too, or that it's also about catching up and letting everyone participate. Unbeknownst to me, they were having no fun because they never got a chance to answer a question or take part in discussions, even though we won a prize. I didn't have any idea of this until my wife told me later. I, of course, was very embarrassed and felt bad. But it's not all bad. I also have great spatial skills. I'm great at seeing patterns, so I love jigsaw puzzles and mazes. It comes in handy in real life, too. One time with my parents, I helped my dad put in a new patio out front. He got these odd-shaped pavers to make it from, very large with lots of points and angles in an asymmetrical fashion. But when we went to lay them out, he spent quite a while, a half hour or so and couldn't figure out a pattern that would properly fill the space with no gaps in corners or anything like that. He got frustrated and walked off, saying I could try if I wanted. I figured out the pattern in 5 minutes or less, just by standing and looking at the pieces in front of me already in the space, mentally fitting them together in different combinations until one worked, then laying them and the rest out that way. Another time, much later, my aunt gave me and my wife a build-it-yourself lamp kit, where you get these plastic pieces to fit together into a globe, along with a cord with a light socket on one end and a plug on the other to put into it when you finish. My wife tried first, sitting with the instructions in front of her for 10 minutes or so, and couldn't get more than a couple pieces together. She just couldn't visualize it. After she quit, I sat down, and after reading the instructions thoroughly and working with it a bit, had it done in a few minutes, and it hangs on our ceiling still. I'm also naturally good with words. I can look at a word and often work out its origin or probable origin, or make connections with other words with similar roots or parts. My wife frequently checks with me on how to spell words for crossword puzzles. Though really, I guess you could say this is just another way of seeing patterns and similarities. Well, that's my little intro about myself. But before we move on, I'd like to invite you to tell your story on our Facebook page. With that, why don't we delve into tonight's tale? Welcome back, Fright Fiends. Ready for another journey on the highways of the night? I hope so, because tonight's journey is special. For you see, our driver is Becca Hayes, and she has picked up a passenger who is off. Let's ride with her and see how she handles an encounter with evil. Note, this story is for adults and contains depictions of violence against women, cursing, and gore. Passenger. Rebecca Hayes, 25, was driving for Uber to help pay her way through grad school. She cruised the dark streets of the nighttime city, mostly ferrying drunk people home from bars. Her next fare wasn't at a bar, however. She was at an apartment building. According to Uber, her fare's name was Carrie, but when Becca pulled up to the entrance of the building, a lone man approached her vehicle. People called Ubers for other people all the time, so Becca wasn't concerned. "Carrie?" she said with a smile as he opened the door. "That's right," he said. "She's my girlfriend. I'm Paul." A charming smile flashed across his face as he sat down. A glance in the mirror showed him a moderately handsome man of normal size with no sense of malice about him. This was a long ride, all the way across town, and Becca didn't want to lose it. After all, she was only out this late to earn some extra cash this week. So she dismissed her misgivings, put the car in gear, and began her journey. Besides, if anything did go wrong, Becca had pepper spray in the door pocket and could call 911 at any time. She also had told her roommate what she was doing and when she expected to be back, and to call the police if she didn't show up or answer her phone. "How's your night going?" Becca asked, hoping to break the tension she felt with some light conversation. "It's fine, a bit slow so far, but I think it'll be more exciting soon." "Oh, how so? Meeting friends at a club?" "Something like that." That smile again. She had to press hard on the brakes to prevent rear-ending the car in front of her. "Sorry about that," Becca said, taking a deep breath to calm herself. Her heart wasn't racing from the near miss. It was him. He was just off. No problem. They stopped short. Had they? She didn't think so. As Becca stepped on the accelerator when the light turned green, Paul began to softly hum. She vaguely recognized the tune but couldn't name it. He hummed in a flat, lifeless tone, like a robot. It was eerie and disquieting, and Becca couldn't stand it, so she turned on the radio to cover it. "Hope you don't mind," Becca said with a forced giggle. He continued humming, a nearly imperceptible shake of the head his only answer. His eyes remained fixed on the mirror. Shuddering, Becca forced her attention back on the road. She began to think of excuses for dropping him off early. After that, she would go home for the night. She was done. It was a roughly half-hour trip to a residential area on the other side of town, and it had already been 10 minutes. Becca decided she would give it 5 more to see if he could tell her anything that would assuage her fear, and if not, she would let him out in a shopping center a bit ahead. before they left the well-lit area for dark residential and industrial streets. "So, are you meeting your girlfriend at the party, or did she not come? What's her name? I know some girls who live in that building." After a long pause, he began. Another pause. "She stayed home with the cold. She just moved in a couple days ago. I'm visiting old friends who already lived in this city," he said, as if remembering a story recently memorized while embellishing it on the spot. Nothing whatsoever about that made Becca feel better. It had been too forced in general. He hadn't even known the name of the city they were in. One last question. "I saw her picture on the app. Such pretty color eyes." "Yes," he said. "Such beautiful blue eyes. My favorite trait." The eyes in the picture had been brown. "I just remembered I have to be somewhere at 2, in 20 minutes. Can I drop you off here?" she asked, indicating the upcoming parking lot, hoping he would say yes, hoping she was overreacting. In the rear view, she saw him remove something hidden at the small of his back under his shirt. It was black, but its shape was unmistakable. "Oh God, he's got a gun. What do I do?" She willed herself to stay calm. His dead eyes remained fixed on the mirror. "No, I really need to get where I'm going. Just keep driving. Do what I say and I'll make it quick. Try anything and you die slow. Don't even think about purposely wrecking. Being in the back, I'd probably walk away with minor injuries at best. If you didn't die, I'd still kill you." As he spoke, Becca watched the shopping center and its lights pass by, the last sparks of hope winking out like the last embers of a dead fire as it slid behind her. Just before she passed it completely, the stoplight at the end of it turned red and she came to a stop. Next to her, the well-lit, nearly full parking lot seemed to mock her. "Too bad, so sorry. It was a good try. Have a nice life." Looking ahead, she saw a dark street lit only by orange arc sodium streetlights on widely spaced poles, security lights on some houses, and the occasional illuminated window, though most were dark, the occupants having long since gone to sleep. Only a few cars trundled along the quiet street. Becca knew that interspersed within this intermittently lit area were islands of pure darkness, parks and woodlots, closed and empty, devoid of witnesses but for night creatures. Perfect places for unspeakable acts. Looking at her phone on its mount, Becca could see that there was a large park within walking distance of the destination it was taking her to. Close enough that if the ride was ended there in the app, it wouldn't seem out of the ordinary. When the light turned green and she proceeded through it, Becca felt as if she were leaving the land of the living and entering a kind of netherworld or purgatory, and at the other end would be the entrance to the land of the dead. She fought back tears at the shittiness of it. I'm supposed to die peacefully at some advanced age in bed, not violently in some shitty little park left for animals to gnaw on. There was about 15 minutes left in the ride, according to the app. 15 minutes in her life. No more laughter, no more tears, no more evenings out with friends, no more chances to find love. Becca's frustration and sadness shifted to anger. Who does this asshole think he is? What gives him the right? "Why," she said. It came out little more than a whisper. "What?" She seemed to have jerked him out of some kind of reverie, perhaps imagining the fun to come. "What did you say?" he asked, seemingly more out of politeness than interest. "I asked why. Why are you doing this?" Loud and angry this time. "Why? Why not? Because it feels good? Because I can? Maybe just because." He smiled again, and Becca noticed his eyes never changed, never lost their dead flatness. "Or did you mean what caused me to be this way? What formative event broke me? Beat by Daddy, maybe, or touched by Mom? Or maybe Mom did drugs or drank while pregnant? I'm afraid there is no secret origin. I just am. The way a shark just is. The way an asteroid on a collision course just is." "It's not fair," Becca screamed. "You have no right." Her cheeks flushed and her knuckles turned white as her grip on the steering wheel tightened. "I have every right," he roared, as a man-eating tiger roars in defiance of those who would kill it. "I have the only rights that matter. The right of the strong over the weak, the right of the predator over the prey, the hunter over the hunted. I don't subscribe to the notions of civilization or society. I don't follow the laws of men. I follow the law of survival of the fittest, and I am the fit." He declaimed this in the booming tones of an orator holding forth, filling the car and making Becca cringe. She asked no further questions, and he retreated into himself. They were now in an area in which neighborhood streets met the larger one they traveled at two-way stop signs, where residents and others would wait for a break in traffic to pull out. At one such upcoming stop sign, a police car sat. Becca saw it, and hope sparked anew, if fitfully. If it pulls out behind me, maybe I can start speeding or weaving to get him to pull me over. As she passed it, in her side view mirror, she saw it pull out, turn left, and head the opposite direction. Damn! It was like the world was against her. The embryonic spark of hope was aborted like a fire being snuffed out before it could fully kindle. In place of the spark was now a dark pit filled with despair. Becca found herself entering into a state of numbness, perhaps a counter to the despair, to keep it from overwhelming her. Houses continued to slide past on either side. It was so silent she could hear the second hand of her watch, tick, 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 counting down the remains of her life, or so she thought anyways. Aside from the occasional rustle of clothing when the man readjusted himself, he was utterly silent. If those dead eyes had not remained fixed in her rear view, she might have thought she were alone. Becca glanced at her phone screen. 10 minutes left, and she'd be turning right in a quarter mile. She also noticed the little F logo at the top of the screen, notifying her of new activity in Facebook. Probably a silly meme or something from a friend, maybe Alyssa or Marcus. Soon they'd be posting sorrowful, heartfelt messages about how much they loved me and how they'd miss me. Her Facebook profile would become a memorial. When Becca's navigation voice, a chipper British lady, spoke up and said, "Turn right ahead," it felt like a friend betraying her. The turn took them into a neighborhood, empty and dark. On her screen, Becca saw the roughly rectangular green square getting closer, closer. Their purported destination was a house another few minutes ahead. That wasn't their real destination, of course. They came alongside a dark patch of forest, and when there was forest on both sides of the road and no more houses visible, the man said, "Pull over." Becca complied. Turn off the lights, leave the car on, leave the app running, and get out slowly. Try to run, try to scream, try anything, I will kill you. Cooperate, let me do what I want, and I'll let you live. Touch the locks on the way out, you die. Becca knew he was lying about letting her live, but had no choice. As he recited this clearly well-rehearsed speech, Becca heard her dome light switch sliding to the off position, meaning it wouldn't come on at all when the door opened. She also heard the man slide over to the seat behind her so they would exit on the same side, thus making it less likely she could get a large head start by bolting out of the car. Get out. Leave the door open. Becca took a deep breath. This is it. This is the end. She pulled the handle and the door opened with a clunk, followed immediately by another clunk as the back door opened. Before pushing her door open, she slid the pepper spray into her palm. When she stepped out, the lingering summer heat, radiating from the pavement, blasted her. Sweat beaded on her forehead. It had to still be in the high 80s or low 90s. Trees loomed overhead like dark sentinels, and the woods were a wall of blackness, like her despair come to life. He started to say something, but before he could, Becca straightened up, brought up the pepper spray in her other hand, let loose a full blast, hoping to incapacitate him so she could get back in the car, lock herself in, and call 911. Unfortunately for Becca, her blast of pepper spray had been misaimed, most of it going past his face. What little did hit his eyes only served to enrage him. She saw this and decided to put as much distance between them as possible, hoping to use the dark woods for cover. If she could get away and lose him, at least for a little bit, she would run back to her car. As Becca neared the first line of trees, something snapped in her. Fury replaced fear. A fierce desire to live replaced a numb acceptance of death. Becca kept her hair long and usually wore it in a ponytail. That ponytail flew out behind her as she ran, and the man was close enough in seconds for his fingers to brush the ends of it. One tiny stumble on Becca's part was enough for him to get close enough to grab it. The scattered leaves and other forest stuff underfoot prevented him from firmly planting and pulling Becca down. Instead, they both began stumbling and flailing as the sudden yank on her ponytail broke her stride and the last of her forward momentum pulled him forward off balance. Unbeknownst to either of them, this undeveloped patch of forest was actually a floodplain, a deep, flat-bottomed valley cut by a creek, and they were only a few feet from the steep slope leading 15 or 20 feet down to the floor below. They had both nearly regained their footing when the man's left foot slipped over the edge. Becca felt herself fly through space, hitting the ground hard, a branch jabbing her in the left butt cheek as she did. Then she was rolling downhill, her vision a repeating whirl of treetops, trunks, ground, treetops, trunks, ground. She did not roll straight, rather she pinballed off tree trunks and several large boulders sticking out of the ground. She came to a stop with a thud against a fallen tree at the bottom. Becca wanted to get up and run, but the world was spinning, and the breath had been knocked out of her. The fall had probably taken 20 seconds, but it had felt much longer. A groan from some distance away told her that they had separated, and that he wasn't jumping up instantly either. After catching her breath and letting the dizziness subside, Becca carefully stood up. Nothing seemed broken, though it was clear she'd be a mass of bruises if she survived. In standing, something flat and metallic slapped against her side, startling her. There was a mild stinging sensation too, though adrenaline seemed to be keeping most of her pain at bay. What? She wondered dully. Looking at her shirt, she saw the black handle of a knife sticking out of it. His knife. It was lodged in her shirt. Once they had entered the forest, she had heard him stuff the gun in his pants and take out a knife, opening it with a sinister snick. Must have gotten stuck accidentally when we both fell. Lucky. Lifting up her shirt, Becca saw a long gash scored across the ribs below her left breast. And, best luck of all, the knife had not only gotten stuck in her shirt, but had somehow held on through her entire tumble, and now she had a weapon. The gun. Maybe he had dropped it, maybe he hadn't. Becca would take no chances. She would assume he had it. But would he use it? She couldn't see any lights at all, but knew houses couldn't be too far. But between the distance and being in a valley, Becca thought if anyone was awake to hear, they would hear only soft pops. Kids lighting fireworks, maybe. She'd have to run for it, though she would hold on to the knife just in case. Just then, something large crashed through the undergrowth nearby. Becca threw herself down and crawled into a bush. "Little girl, where are you? Let's get this over with. It would have been quick, but you pissed me off, so now it's going to be nice and slow." His voice had a strange combination of annoyance and excitement. Becca forced herself to remain as still and quiet as she could, clamping her jaw shut and biting her lips to keep from screaming as his thudding footsteps drew closer. Come out wherever you are, bitch," he spat, clearly ready to end things. Waves of terror coursed through Becca, and she shivered when she saw his feet appear right where she had been standing a short while ago. Looking upward, she saw the barrel of the gun glint in a shaft of moonlight that had managed to find its way through the canopy. The man began to check the bushes all around. Closer. 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 Becca tasted blood as she bit down harder than ever against the screams that threatened to erupt. Clutching the knife in a death grip, she saw his free hand appear in the foliage above her as he began searching her hiding spot. She felt wetness in her pants as her bladder let go. Oh shit, what if he smells it? His head loomed above, a dark featureless mass, as he leaned over to look down. His gun hand joined the first to spread the foliage. Just as the foliage began to part above her, something crashed through the trees some distance to her left. The man's head lifted and turned. "Ah, there you are," he said, a smile audible in his voice. "Don't go anywhere." He turned and headed off to investigate. Relief flooded Becca, and all she could do for a long moment was to sob silently in joy and amazement. After it became clear that the man was no longer close by, Becca leapt up and began running in the opposite direction. Paying no attention to whether he was following or to what was in her path, Becca ran heedlessly, recklessly on. Panic began to overwhelm her. "Faster! Faster!" it screamed. Branches whipped her face and body, leaving scratches and wheals. She stumbled over roots and other debris frequently, but each time she managed to right herself without losing much speed. Never did she completely lose footing. Never did she step in a hole and twist an ankle. Once she nearly screamed when she thought he had somehow gotten ahead of her, but it turned out to be a small herd of deer, startled by her, leaping away into the forest. Still she ran. Suddenly he crashed through the underbrush and was on her, dragging her out of the bushes and into a more open area. He kicked her hard in the gut. Once, twice, 3 times. Pain racked her and she felt the knife slip from her grasp. Shit! Becca snuffed in a breath just quickly enough to recover and spot his foot coming in again. She managed to grab it and shove it aside. He stumbled and she lunged at him, intending to tear his eyes out. She managed to scratch his face badly, but he threw her off before she could do any real damage. Then he was on her, smacking her head into the ground, punching and slapping her until she was dazed. She fought back, punching and kicking, but it was ineffectual. Then a lucky kick landed between his legs, and with a grunt his grip loosened. Becca shoved him off and began to crawl away. Before she could get up and run, he grabbed her leg. Flipping her over, he lifted her leg by the foot and brought his own heavy-booted one down on her knee with all the strength he could muster. There was a sickening crack, and a searing pain blotted out all else for a moment. Becca screamed. "Think you'll be less trouble now? But best to be sure." His fist slammed into her face, and her nose exploded like a rotten tomato. Becca spit out some teeth as blood covered her mouth and lower jaw. Another blow followed, this time to her right eye. Everything went black. When awareness returned, no more than a few seconds later, the first thing she noticed was the sensation of the man tugging her shorts down. Second was that her face already felt 4 times its normal size, and she could barely breathe between her smashed nose and the blood draining down her throat. Becca managed to spit it out and make a feeble effort to push him off. The man swatted her arms aside as minor annoyances and went back to undressing her. This is it, she thought, as she let her eyes close in preparation for drifting into herself and letting it end. Only, what was that under her right hand? Not natural, it was flat, hard, and textured. The knife handle! Becca's hand closed around it and adrenaline surged through her, a final, maddening surge. Her eye flew open, the right one was swollen shut, and she bared her damaged teeth in a wolfen snarl, through which a feral roar tore out of her as she brought the knife up and jammed it into the side of the man's neck, its 6-inch blade penetrating deeply. His eyes flew wide in shock and his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water in its last dying seconds. It was an expression that said, "This wasn't supposed to happen." Becca reached up and grabbed his forehead for leverage. "Fuck you," she snarled, spitting a large goblet of bloody saliva into his face. She pulled the knife toward her as she pushed his head back, ripping his throat open from end to end in a wide, gaping hole. Blood and viscera cascaded onto Becca in a hot, sticky torrent, his face draining of all color. The last of the adrenaline and her energy faded, and her arms dropped to her sides again. His arms, hands still grasping her shorts, supported him for a couple seconds more. Then, his eyes went glassy and he collapsed onto Becca, dead weight. Silence returned as exhaustion overtook her, and the world once again faded to black. Some unknowable time later, Becca's eye flew open as she jolted to awareness. "Jesus!" she almost screamed when she saw his eyes staring straight into hers, less than an inch away. "He's dead. Calm down." She had no doubt as his face rested against the undamaged side of hers. His cheek was cold and stiff against hers, his tongue like a dry, dead slug resting next to her mouth. But his face was moving side to side a little. Then Becca realized she could hear chewing and heavy breathing. Turning her eye to the left, Becca saw a fox gnawing at his face. "Go away! Get!" she screamed. The startled fox darted into the bushes and was gone. Becca lay back and took a breath, thinking over her options as she did so. She knew between exhaustion and her broken knee she wouldn't be walking out. She also knew that if no one had come yet, they wouldn't be. She'd have to crawl out. Becca forced the corpse off herself and began. Slowly, slowly she made her way, wanting frequently to give up, but never letting herself, pushing herself on and on. If she gave up, he would win. Even dead, he would win. She wouldn't let that happen. She harnessed all the rage that had carried her through all the times men had put her down, held her back, overlooked her for being a woman. All the times men had harassed her and objectified her. That rage sustained her and pushed her on. After what seemed forever but was maybe an hour, she reached her car. The door was shut but unlatched. With the last of her strength, she pushed it open. There, on the magnet holder in her door side vent, was her phone, still plugged into her still quietly idling car. Becca felt a surge of relief and pulled herself halfway into the seat, her legs still hanging out. Tears of joy and triumph fell from her good eye as she picked up the phone, dialed 911, and asked for an ambulance and the police. Becca hung up and watched the sun crest the trees, felt with rapturous joy its rays begin to heat her skin. Thinking back over the night, she knew her parents would say God had saved her. She was fine with luck. Becca closed her eye and savored the sensations of a new day she never thought she'd see. The sun on her skin, birds greeting the morning. Even her pain was glorious in its indications of life. She smiled a broken, bloody smile and listened for sirens. She had survived. hope you enjoyed the ride. If you did, please like and subscribe or follow and rate us. Until next time, stay scared.